Hello guys, in today's video I'm going to be talking about setups and taking you through exactly what I do to set up the car and explain each of the changes I make as I go along. Hopefully this video will be helpful and it will give you a few ideas on how to set up your own car. Now before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. I've really tried to do my best to give as much useful information to you as I can, and please let me know in the comments if you have any questions and want to see more videos just like this. So the car we're going to be using today is the BMW M4 GT3 car. This was the new car that was introduced as part of the next gen upgrade. Now if you don't already, I would highly recommend sticking to one car for a prolonged period of time, because each car has its own individual handling characteristics and it's very useful to get used to that and learn exactly what needs to be done to change the feeling of the car on track. The track I'm at today is Zolder, and this is one that I don't currently have a setup for with the BMW, so it's very useful making this video because I'll end up with a setup. And you'll notice the first thing I do is select the aggressive preset setup. So pretty much every single setup I do on this game originates from the aggressive preset, and the first thing I do is reduce the fuel load and change the brakes to pad type 1, and then I head out on track to see how it feels initially. So we reduce the fuel load initially just so that we're not driving around with a big heavy car that might affect handling a little bit too much, and we put on pad type 1 because that's more of a high performance pad. So pad type 2, that is the default, that's useful for anything that's kind of over 2 hours long in races, as it is a bit better on pad wear, but it doesn't have quite the performance of pad 1. And if you're doing any kind of racing or sessions that are below 2 hours, an hour and a half, pad 1 is definitely going to be faster, and especially on console we don't really tend to have any races that are much over an hour really. So the reason that we start with the aggressive preset setup is that it's actually a pretty decent base to start with. You can set pretty decent lap times with it, and the safe preset setup is a little bit slower, it's just a little bit too understeery, so we always start with the aggressive preset. Now on these first couple of laps I'm just trying to get a feel for what the car handles like, and I'm keeping a very close eye on the tyre pressures. So tyre pressures are extremely key to putting in the fastest lap times, and you need to make sure that when the tyres are hot, the tyre pressures are around about 27.5 to 27.7 psi. So we're going to be looking at how the tyre pressures change over the first couple of laps, and then we'll be heading back to the garage and making any necessary changes. You may also notice that I've already changed the brake bias. I've moved it further towards the rear. So changing the brake balance, if you move the bias towards the front, so raising that number, you'll get more understeer under braking, and if you lower that number, move it more towards the rear, you'll get oversteer under braking. So if you're struggling to turn in as you're coming off the brakes, then you might just need to move the brake bias a little bit towards the rear, as I've done here. So after a couple of laps, the tyre pressures still weren't anywhere near where I needed them, so I decided to head back to the pits and make some changes. And now the first thing we're going to do is head over to the Aero part of the setup and raise the ride height a little bit. We did have a bit of an issue with the chicane on one of the laps. The curbs are very, very high there, so we're just raising the ride height of the car a little bit to give a bit more clearance, in the hope that that won't happen again. It's very important when you're adjusting the ride height that to keep the balance the same, you raise each the front and the rear by the same amount. You can quite drastically change the balance of the car by changing the ride height. So if you raise the rear of the car in relation to the front, you will put more balance towards the front of the car and you will have more of an oversteery car. If you lower the rear or raise the front only, then you'll end up with the opposite, so you'll end up with more of an understeery car. The other thing we're going to do is close the brake ducts by one click, and this will reduce the amount of cooling across the brakes and will help to warm the tyres up and raise the tyre pressures a little bit too. Having more closed brake ducts will also reduce drag very slightly. We're going to leave the rear wing as it is because the balance is not too bad. We are going to raise the rear of the car though by one extra click just to help us with a bit more turning. So next up we're going to go to the dampers, and I'm just going to reduce some of the fast settings here. So the fast settings control the damping during fast suspension movers such as bumps and curves, and this should just help with that chicane and having a little bit more control through there. Finally, I'm going to increase the cold tyre pressures so that when we're out on track, we are hopefully getting towards our target of 27.5 to 27.7 psi. So every time you make a change, you want to head back out on track again, give it a couple of laps and see how different the car feels. You don't want to make too many changes all at once though, because then you don't really know what's working if you haven't improved your lap time. You can see here we've finally come across the line and we've set a 129.8 now. The tyres are getting closer to where we need them to be. They're currently low 27s. The left side of the car looks a little bit better than the right side of the car too. You can see as we go through sector 1, it looks like we're already up on our time a little bit here. The car is handling the curbs in the chicane much better on this lap as well, and as we cross the line we go another couple of tenths faster with a 129.6, and then immediately on the following lap we went faster again with a 129.1. So the lap times are coming down and we're getting a lot closer to where we want to be. We want to be getting into the 28s really here at Zolder, but again the tyre pressures just need a bit of adjusting now. We need to try and increase the left side a tiny bit and a little bit more on the right hand side. We are also going to make a couple of changes to the rear toe and camber here. If you look at the IMO settings, or the OMI if you're looking at the left hand side of the screen, you can see three numbers. We've got on the left hand side 74, 78, 81. Now that's the temperature of the outside, middle and inside of the tyre, and at the rear you don't really want to have more than sort of 6 degrees really, so we are just a little bit over that. So I'm going to reduce the rear camber slightly, and I'm also going to reduce the rear toe slightly. So the rear camber will add a little bit of rear stability in cornering situations, as will increasing the positive toe. And with the car at the moment, it's feeling very drivable. It's not feeling unstable at the rear, so there's going to be no harm in making those changes. The temperature readings on the front of the car are okay as well. You want to make sure they're within about 8 or 9 degrees on the front tyres. In the mechanical grip settings, I'm just going to decrease the brake bias. I've been doing it on the fly at the moment, and I just want to make sure I'm leaving the pits with the correct setting. I try not to change too much of the suspension setup and damper setup, because to be honest, to do it properly you need to be having telemetry, and you can only do that on the PC version of the game. Just as a bit of a general rule of thumb, if you increase the amount of downforce, you want to increase the stiffness of the suspension a little bit, because all that extra downforce is going to be pushing on those springs. Softening up the springs will also give you a little bit more grip in slow corners, and increasing the stiffness of the rear can help with rotation of the car. They're the sort of general rules I go by when adjusting the suspension settings. Now once again we head back out on track to evaluate if the changes have helped with the tyre pressures and balance of the car, and you can see here after a couple of laps our tyre pressures are much closer now to where we need them to be, and you can see we're going to cross the line to go almost half a second faster than our best lap with a 128.7. so we're now in the 1 minute 28, and these times are looking much better. You can see the tyre pressures on the left hand side of the car are pretty much perfect, but the right hand side could just do with a tiny increase. So after another lap we didn't go any quicker, so it was back to the pits once again and make those small adjustments to the tyre pressures. So I thought I'd also explain what the toe and the camber does on the front of the car. So if you increase the negative value of the toe on the front of the car, you will get more turning, so a potentially more oversteery car, and the same kind of applies with the camber a little bit. You'll get a little bit more lateral grip in high speed corners if you increase the negative camber, so increase the negative value. Caster angle can affect the stability of the car and how heavy the steering feels, but because of force feedback I decided not to change that too much. For our next stint we are going to lower the front and rear of the car by 1mm, just to try and go a little bit more aggressive and see if we can improve our times further. We're getting very close now to what I feel is a good setup, and after another couple of laps we managed to come out the final corner about 3/10 up on our previous best to set a 128.4. We did also adjust the brake bias again, just moving it a tiny bit further towards the rear once again to 56.5. So I'm pretty pleased with how the setup feels on the car now. So we're going to go back to the pits once again and go into the setup, change the brake bias quickly so that it's set for immediately when we drive out the pits, and then I'll quickly show you through my full setup here. Just a quick note on the electronics, make sure you're using ECU map 1 for most cars, because that will be the most powerful, and adjusting the traction control and ABS is kind of on personal preference really. So we're going to save this setup as a base setup. We're then going to head over to the fuel and strategy tab and create a setup for a 20-minute race. So 20-minute races are quite common in the public service, so we're going to work out how much fuel we need based upon our fuel consumption of 3.4 litres per lap. So we're going to work that out to be around about 50 litres, and that should be enough. And then we're going to save that as a race setup, and also make a note of the track temperature too. The track temperature and ambient temperature, so that when we go into a race, if the track is significantly hotter than it was today, we know that we might need to just open the brake ducts a little bit and maybe lower the tyre pressures. Likewise, if the track's much colder than it was today, then we might need to close the brake ducts a bit and increase the tyre pressures before heading out on track. Next up, we're going to make a qualifying setup. So we're going to reduce the fuel load, so we've got just enough for around about a 4-lap stint. So we're going to lower it down to 14 litres of fuel, as you can see here. We're also going to increase the tyre pressure slightly too, and what this is going to do is just bring them up to the optimal temperature a little bit quicker. So in a qualifying stint, we want those tyres to come up to pressure, the ideal pressure, quite quickly. We don't want to have to do too many laps before they get to where they want to be, and if they start to go a little bit too high after 5 laps or so, that doesn't matter too much, because by then we probably would have finished our qualifying stint. So we're going to save this setup then, again making a note of the track conditions and air temperature, just so that when we jump into a qualifying session we can easily adjust based on the temperatures that we have in that session. So the final thing left to do was to test our low fuel qualifying setup, and after a couple of laps the tyre temperatures were pretty much optimal, and we crossed the line to set at 1:28.2 to achieve our fastest lap of the day. So thanks for watching guys, I hope this video has been very helpful. If you've enjoyed it, then give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Please let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this, and I will see you again very soon.